George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
A Merry Christmas to each and every one of you from us here at the mother of all talk shows, Towers. It has been a remarkable year. Not exactly one to look back on in pleasure or happiness, but eventfulness, we couldn't fault it. It has kept MOATS going right at the top of the international agenda, week after week after week. Tens of millions of people have watched the mother of all talk shows this past year. I suspect that tens of millions more will do so in the year to come. You, like me, may be full of steak pie, if not good cheer, except if artificially induced. But I do hope that this Christmas special, mother of all talk shows, will remind you that at least you have us and we have you. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows special Christmas edition. What a year it has been, but at least you've had us and we have had you. One disaster after another, going right up almost to Christmas Day. People were being mown down in Christmas markets. People were being bombed. Their residential tower blocks hit by drones. Heavy ammunition firing all over the globe, with the threat of the heaviest of ammunition still to come. It has been one long bloody war this year of 2024. Some of the wars look like they are coming to an end. Others look like they are just beginning. The United States presidency of Joseph Biden, steeped in disgrace, soaked in blood, is coming to an almost senile end. The sight of him walking out of his helicopter, holding on to his wife for dear life, made one wonder if he was going to make the new year. Maybe Article 25 of the US Constitution was about to be triggered, but not yet, at least in any case. It would allow Kamala Harris at least to be remembered for something other than blowing $1.3 billion and still ending up hundreds of millions of dollars in debt with her ill-fated, disastrous presidential campaign. Donald Trump won fair and square by every metric. He won the popular vote, he won the House, he won the Senate, he won the Electoral College by a landslide. So there's no excuse, Donald, for changing things. You have to turn America back to the reset position. The United States, with all of its social and racial and societal ills and its crumbling, devastated infrastructure, badly needs you to put America first. But all the signs are that the same swamp creatures that you surrounded yourself with in your first presidential term haven't gone away, you know. There are some bright hopes, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., but they are heavily outnumbered by the little Marco Rubios and by the Lindsey Grahams. They are heavily outnumbered by those who don't want to put America first, they want to put Israel first. They may or may not be ready to ditch Zelensky, as you plainly are, but they're not prepared to ditch the maniacal last stand for the American empire around the globe. And above all, they may very well be trying to leverage you into a wider Middle East war that could become World War III. We must hope that the war in the Ukraine is coming to an end, but the war in the Middle East continues apace. Mass slaughter, day after day after day, every single day, almost every single hour of this year, 2024, has been the order of the day in the Gaza Strip, in Jerusalem, in the occupied West Bank, in the Syrian Arab Republic, as was, and of course in Lebanon next door. Carnage, all out carnage, and all of it traceable back to that dreadful, gruesome twosome, Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. If the world could have seen the back of one, and preferably both of those, at the beginning of this year, it might have been a different year, but that was not to be. And in the course of that 12 months, 2 shows every week, tens and tens of millions of viewers, we have tried to keep abreast of these great events, these dismal, bloody events, and the 1 or 2 great events that also took place. We have charted the course of American politics and of British politics, but we haven't been shy of venturing in to French politics, where little Macron absolutely deplores the heavy-handed treatment of democracy protesters in Georgia, but has no qualms at all about breaking heads and even limbs and lives in his own country of France. We looked oftentimes at little soldier Schultz and his bonkers berserk foreign minister Anna Baerbock. If you want to know why I call her that, why not Google it. The German government is in a state of collapse. Not even 28% of the German public intend to vote for either of the 2 parties of the governing coalition. 14% for one, 14% for the other, or just a shade under it. Little Schultz is finished, Anna Baerbock is finished, but who will come next in Germany? They keep calling this AfD far right, and to be sure, they are Nigel Farage with the hair on its chest. But the truth is, the vast majority of the German people believe that it was a nightmarish, foolish act of Angela Merkel to open Germany's doors to literally millions of refugees in the hope that it would kickstart the German economy, provide a new and cheap labour force, a non-unionized labour force that could fill the factories and manufactures of what was the workshop of Europe. But it has all gone terribly wrong. First of all, the factories, workshops, mines and mills are closing at an almost weekly rate. The profitability of Germany's greatest industrial conglomerates is falling and falling, in some cases virtually to zero. The smokestacks are silent across German industry, and the once much vaunted boost to the population of Germany is now turning toxic. Not just because of the events in the Christmas market in Magdeburg in the former East Germany, not just because of the natural tensions which arise when the economy goes south between those who are German and those who are guest workers, as the Germans used to call them. That's inevitable. When the economy is on the up, nobody notices. When the bus is moving forward, nobody is looking out the windows. But now that Germany is in a grave economic situation, the social tensions have risen to the surface with a tremendous bang. And the reason is self-inflicted. It wasn't just Merkel, whose gamble hasn't paid off. It was little Schultz and Anna Baerbock, who have conscripted their country and its economy into Joe Biden's army. No country in the whole of Europe has been more maniacally in support of Netanyahu's genocide in Gaza and more maniacally in support of little Zelensky's coke habit just up the road in Kiev. Germans have been in Kiev before. The Panzers have been there on the Ukrainian steppe before. The Germans have been in the Russian Federation many times before, and they were always sent homewards in ignominious and smoking ruin and defeat. And that's what's happened again this time. Russia has won the war in Ukraine. A Dutch auction has now broken out amongst all those who forced Zelensky's government not to sign a peace agreement with Russia initialed in Istanbul just 2 months into the war. Told them that they must keep fighting until the last Ukrainian. Well, the last Ukrainian has almost arrived. 1 million Ukrainians of military age have fled the country. Others would if they weren't ignominiously arrested and tumbled into military vehicles and driven straight to the front line if they could. The truth is, the Ukrainian people want peace. The Ukrainian people are tired of a war which has cost them more than 1 million men. 1 million men. And cost them 1/3 of their national territory. Never, ever to be recovered. The Ukrainian people, if they could vote, would vote Zelensky out in a landslide. In fact, he wouldn't even turn up for the election. But he has helpfully avoided that by the simple recourse of cancelling the elections. There will be no presidential elections as long as Zelensky is in charge. And so the Ukrainian people are trapped between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the iron wall at the border that prevents them from fleeing to neighboring countries, and the hard place is the onrushing Russian attacking forces who are seizing territory by the kilometer, not by the meter, every single day. Towns, villages, and soon the biggest cities, the most famous cities in the eastern part of Ukraine will fall. Kharkov and above all, Odessa. The Russian advance will not stop until a deal is struck. A deal cannot be struck with Zelensky. Zelensky will have to be prevailed upon to leave for one of his beachfront properties purchased around the globe with his ill-gotten gains. So we're some way off from the endgame. And as long as they don't get around the negotiating table, Russia is creating facts on the ground which will never be undone. Mind you, cancelling elections became all the rage in the last 12 months. The EU prevailed upon Romania to cancel their presidential election because the wrong guy was poised to win it by a landslide. A guy who wanted to end the war in Ukraine. A guy who did not regard Russia as his enemy. And that was a price that NATO was not prepared to pay, because NATO has invested large in Romania. It's intended to be the biggest NATO military base anywhere in the world. So you can't have a president who doesn't agree, even if he's the president that the people want. And of course, other elected governments, like the Hungarian, like the Slovakian, have been undermined, have been subverted at every turn by the NATO and EU powers that be. Keir Starmer, as I speak, is on an airplane. He badly needs a holiday after the stresses and strains of the last 6 months as Prime Minister of Great Britain. I have an idea. We don't have an Article 25. We cannot force Keir Starmer to step down, but his members of Parliament can. Here's my suggestion to them. For the good of Keir Starmer's mental health, and for the good of the mental health of all of us, let Starmer make it a one-way ticket to wherever it is he's gone to recuperate. Anyway, we have got royalty, showbiz royalty, on the show for you tonight. And it's coming up right after this. Stay tuned.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement. A big thank you to all our wonderful listeners, as the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast is now one of the most listened to political podcasts in the entire world. We are the #1 English-speaking political podcast in the Middle East, and in the last year alone have charted in the top 10 in podcast land in Pakistan, Russia, and China. Like, rate, and subscribe to the MOATS podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts to be a part of the fastest rising independent news show in the world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
Abby Martin is show business royalty, at least on our side of the political fence. Everywhere she goes, she attracts a mass following. The fact that she's bright, brave, and beautiful has something to do with it. But the most important thing is that she is so often right, and right ahead of the game. Her numbers on her interviews with me over the last year are testament to the box office that is Abby Martin. I started out by asking her about what Joe Biden is doing to stop the Gaza war.
I mean, look, Joe Biden is a genocider. He's a criminal. He's sitting there eating ice cream, pontificating on, oh, maybe we can have a ceasefire next week or perhaps the week after. It's an abomination, as 2.3 million people less now, since so many scores have been killed. But starvation has taken hold, George, and we know that dropping a mere 28,000, I think, aid packets, food packets, as bombs are also simultaneously being dropped while people are starving to death. What does that do? It's a drop in the bucket. And you have the audacity of publications like the New York Times, who just ran with a falsified story about mass rape taking place, hiring random psychopaths to adjudicate the atrocities on October 7th. And they're writing haikus trying to talk around this nonsense on the heels of this massacre, this widespread massacre where Israeli tanks and snipers open fire on Palestinians, scavenging, starving to death. George, this is what we're dealing with. It's complete moral bankruptcy from the entire world. And look at 2 Congress people in our Congress, Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib. They're the only people who have pledged to stop arming this genocidal apartheid state. I'm embarrassed to be an American. I'm embarrassed that this is the political representation that we have 5 months in to this genocide, George.
It is very powerful as you express it. Let's leave, if you like, the superficial politics behind and dive deeper. It has to be a matter of deep psychology for so many politicians in your country and in mine to be as unmoved by what you and I are watching as we are moved by it. What lies beneath it? What's the reason for our politicians being completely unmoved at massacres of infants, at the maiming, amputations, and, heads burst open of little babies being taken to now non-existent hospitals. How is it possible not to be moved by that?
5 months of seeing children shredded apart. I do not know the answer to that, George, other than political cowardice and the fact that these politicians only care about one thing and one thing only, their political careers. You do not get into politics in either of our countries if you are a moral person, other than, of course, people like you. I mean, it is unbelievable and disgusting to see the amount of politicians completely beholden to a genocidal apartheid state, committing genocide. I mean, killing scores of civilians, women, infants, like you said. I mean, this is a genocidal policy. You are depriving infants of formula and nursing mothers of water. Look, Joe Biden said it himself, and I think he elucidated it perfectly decades ago on the House floor when he said if Israel didn't exist, we would need to create her to serve our interests. And when you look at Israel, I mean, this tiny state, I mean, it might as well be the 51st state. It's an appendage of the US empire. It's a settler colonial outpost, and it's used as a battering ram for US imperialism and its junior collaborators, which is the United Kingdom. So it's sick that, I mean, you see Code Pink, you see 5 months of people confronting politicians in the halls of Congress, marching out in the streets, doing civil disobedience actions everywhere, right? And these politicians remain unmoved. How is that possible? How are you a human being? How is it possible that John Kirby's sitting up there crying crocodile tears for children in Ukraine and is completely stoic as infant after infant are shredded to bits? I can't claim to know, George. I'm sitting here every day wrapping my mind around the medieval barbarism that we're seeing unfold, that really just surpass the human limitations of evil every single day.
It has brought the worst out in our public officials, but it has also brought the best out in our public. There's never been an anti-war movement like the one we have now for an end to the slaughter in Gaza. In Britain, for now, it's almost 150 days, I think. There has not been a single day when there has not been a significant action, even in the smallest towns. I lived until Thursday in a very small town in Scotland where a small number, but a dedicated number of people were out protesting every day. And that's true in every village, town, hamlet, city, throughout the United Kingdom. And I'm certain it's also true in the US.
Indeed. I mean, I was radicalized on the heels of the Iraq War in a post 9/11 frenzy of Islamophobia and just rabid nationalism and unquestioning patriotism. And I think that finally we're seeing a new internationalist anti-war movement that's questioning US empire, finally, that's tying all of these disparate movements together, understanding that we are no one's free until all of us are free, finally humanizing Palestinians, finally rejecting the dogma of the corporate media, the orthodoxy of US capitalism. It's a beautiful thing to witness, George. It's very unfortunate that there has to be a massacre of this magnitude for so many people to wake up, but I am here for it. I'm here for it. I'm here for the rejection of the two-party system. I'm here for Gen Z saying, no, we're not going to vote for genociders. We're not going to vote for a party that's committing genocide. It's beautiful to see so many tens of millions of people around the world rejecting this, George, despite the detachment and the disenfranchisement of our political system and our representation, the people that claim to represent us but do not. There's such a severe detachment from our government to the people in the streets, and they're depending on us getting tired, right? They want us to forget. Well, no, we see with our own eyes. We're not going to get tired. We know what justice looks like, and we're not going to stop until that's achieved. And that means Palestine being free. It doesn't just mean an end to the bloodletting. It means an end to the occupation, and it means the liberation of Palestine. And it's an incredible thing to see this global movement taking root. And it's not going to stop, George. I think we both know that. And that's what terrifies them.
Yeah, I think that's true. Now, as well as being activists, both of us are also involved in media, although YouTube, I think, wiped out a lot of your work. Some of the finest work produced in the English language was wiped out by the book burners of the new censors in big tech. But so let's talk about media, if we can, for a minute. Again, one marvels at the ability of people who call themselves journalists to be unmoved by the plight of Julian Assange in a London dungeon, and to be ready to haiku, as you wonderfully put it, for Israel in the most base and degraded way. And you name-check the New York Times, but the New York Times is not alone, is it? The New York Times, all of these television stations, MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and all of these people. Again, I ask, although I appreciate it's difficult to come up with an answer, what moves them? What allows them to sleep at night, knowing as they must, because they're seeing the same videos as you and me. It just seems to have a different impact on them than it does on us.
You know, I always say, George, that corporate media, you know, as we know, is subsidized by the very institutions that journalists should be exposing, right? Banks, oil companies, defense contractors. When you are a journalist getting into corporate media, you are a willing agent of empire. You have to believe in the reigning orthodoxy of global capitalism and of U.S. imperialism. Otherwise, you will not sustain jobs in these institutions. And so I think people like Rachel Maddow, Andrea Mitchell, I mean, Anderson Cooper, we know that he donned a CIA jacket. He tried to get into the CIA just like Tucker Carlson once did. I mean, look, I think it's really simple. I mean, you have to be a true believer in the system, and you have to wash away all of the crimes and atrocities that are being committed in our names, and you have to apologize for them. And I think that we see revolts happening within the institutions, people writing, you know, sternly worded letters, whether it be in the halls of Congress, these staffers, or within the halls of the New York Times saying, this is too much for us. Look, leave your posts, okay? Because at this point, you're an accomplice. Because institutions like the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of these Beltway media publications and so-called papers of record, they are accomplices to genocide. Those who are running the editorial line in these publications should be brought up to The Hague, right? For complicity, for engineering and manufacturing consent among the American public. Because if these headlines were written differently, if the stories weren't buried, the leads weren't buried at paragraph 8, you know, I mean, I think that the public opinion would have been changed decades ago, George. We know how this works. And when you have an institution like the New York Times, I mean, I have to keep going back to that because that's what so many liberals take as the Bible in this country. But look at Judith Miller, you know, coming out saying, oh, yeah, we screwed up in the wake of the Iraq War. And look at them today. They've learned nothing. We have to reject these institutions wholly, right? And once and for all. And I think that's what we're seeing. I mean, generationally, there's such a huge rejection of that corporate line. And, you know, people are finally seeking truth elsewhere and knowing we're not going to change these institutions by asking them to cover us fairly or to humanize Palestinians or Arabs. No, that's not the way it's going to work. Because we know that all of these journalists, they have opinions. They want to appear neutral. No, they just couch their opinions in think tanks that are subsidized by the very same bloodlust, genocidal war profiteers that dictate to us what's going on corporate media and these forums and panels. You know, it's sick, George. And I think that we know the way it works. And that's why, you know, previously I went to a network like RT or Telesur to circumvent that bias, but to tell the truth about my country, because you're simply not allowed to. But look at what they did. They banned, they treated us like infants. They infantilized us all by just succumbing to censorship, like they were chomping at the bit to do for so long. Look at what they did to Tucker Carlson for going and interviewing Putin. They said he should be sanctioned that Putin should not be heard. Look, I think I have a lot of disagreements with Putin, but why should we not hear from world leaders? I want to judge with my own mind and to see with my own eyes what people think and what people are telling me about global affairs. I'm not a child, so I don't like global powers and media giants algorithmically dictating and narrating and curating my reality. I can speak and learn for myself. But that's what they're scared of again, George. They're scared of people with free minds to learn and choose for themselves what the truth and reality really is.
Now, Oscar Wilde said we were two people divided by a common language. I say that Britain and its political class are two cheeks of the same arse. You'd say two cheeks of the same ass. But it is true, isn't it, that you've got a choice between Genocide Joe and Zion Don, and we've got a choice between, if anything, two even more midget intellects and political ideologies. How are we going to get out of this, Abby?
I mean, the left is so disenfranchised in this country. We're blamed for every political upset, and they just don't cater to us at all. We know there's no real third-party option in this country. The entire system is completely rigged. At this point, even members of the squad are essentially just institutional obstacles from us attaining anything that we actually want to do. I think this genocide has really revealed plainly who's on our side and who's not, George. I mean, look, there's so many elements that are rigged in the American political system. It's a complete joke. And I think, in the wake of Bernie, I was very excited about the Bernie movement, not necessarily Bernie himself, although he certainly was one of the better figures in Congress for the last several decades, and I think true to a certain extent to himself. But at this point, I think in the wake of that, the millions of people who simply didn't know where to go after Genocide Joe took office, and they picked the top cop on the heels of the Black Lives Matter movement to really just say F you to the millions of people who are out in the streets, the biggest social movement since civil rights in this country. I think that really says it all about the utter contempt that the political establishment has for social movements and for the youth. And look, the youth is looking at the future of this country and saying we're on the precipice of climate catastrophe. Half of the people living in this country don't have enough money in savings. They're living paycheck to paycheck. No wonder half of the eligible voters don't engage at all. But they're just simply going to blame Jill Stein or Cornel West or the young people for not voting for Genocide Joe a second term. And, in the words of my Palestinian friend Ali Abu Nima, he said, look, Joe Biden is our Hitler. So don't tell me that he's the lesser of two evils. Even if Trump would be doing the exact same thing, he is our Hitler. So how dare you talk down to us and tell us, pathologize the left and say, no, you don't understand. Trump could be in office. Well, look, this is already the worst case scenario for so many people, and people who just are moral people. You don't have to be Muslim, Palestinian, right? Or Arab. You simply just have to be a free thinker and someone who has moral courage and sees with their own eyes what is going on. So I think Joe Biden needs to be and will be punished at the ballot box. And there's really no other avenues to do so politically other than what people are doing, getting out in the streets in the millions, right? And that's what needs to happen. We need to shut down business as usual, George, and we need to keep going until they listen to us, until they are forced to act on our behalf. And that's the only way social change has ever happened in this country. Voting is secondary. Voting happens once every 2 to 4 years. The real change that happens is the people who are out in the streets every single day, all day, making it happen. And we will continue to do so until we have a viable future.
How wonderful. And you can follow Abby's new movie called earthsgreatestenemy.com. And also follow her on Twitter at Abby Martin. Coming up, Gerald Celente and his take on World War III. Stay tuned. even though it has moved its mass murder campaign from Gaza, although there's still mass murdering in Gaza, of course, no day off for the poor refugees in the concentration camp of Gaza, but they have moved their killing fields to Lebanon. Lebanon, a sovereign country. Lebanon, a member of the United Nations. Lebanon, a country to which every other country in the world has diplomatic relations, has ambassadors in place, is being remorselessly bombed with hundreds and hundreds of air attacks, killing hundreds and hundreds of people every day, most of them women and children. Was it ever thus? As I said the other night, put the letter H in front of any Arab child and you can slaughter them with impunity. Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, they all look the same. They all are deserving of death, violent, sudden death, delivered from American airplanes, using American missiles and bombs, with British airplanes supplying the targeting information and the offending American and British reconnaissance flights flying out of somebody else's country, namely Cyprus, and the British sovereign base there.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Gerald Celente looks and sometimes sounds like he was on the set of Goodfellas or Godfather 1, 2, and 3. But he is one of the savviest voices around in the United States. He runs something called the Trends Journal, which sets the trends as well as predicting them. People read his journal and they know where events are headed at. I interviewed him many times, but none more memorably than this. I always feel he's about to break into swearing, but he never does. But he makes you feel like swearing. Let me show you what I mean. I started by asking him about the growing concerns about the beginning of World War III. Watch this.
Well, the world's at war already. World War III began, it was a cover of our Trends Journal magazine on February 22nd, 2022. From COVID war to Ukraine war to World War. And it's only escalating now with the Israel war. And I was listening to you before we went on the air, and you nailed it perfectly. And by the way, I also want to congratulate you for all that you do as a real man, standing up and fighting and being in the British Parliament now and speaking the truth.
Thank you.
And as you were saying, when you said what was going on in Israel and giving them the history of it, you said it was like talking to little kids. And that's where we're at now. And you talked about Iran. This is one of my books called Trend Tracking, far better than Megatrends Time magazine. 1989, I wrote this book. I write how I became a trend forecaster. And I became a political atheist when, and it's right here, the fall of the Shah. I was the chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry. Number 2 guy running a major trade association. Back then, all I wanted to do was make money and have a good time. I was killing environmental legislation at the height of the environmental movement. And I'm living between DC and Chicago. And the Iranian conflict starts heating up. And Jimmy Carter, the little peanut farmer with a pair of cojones about the size of a peanut, he goes over there to visit the Shah on New Year's Eve with the Shah and his wife. I write about this in detail. He came back and he said that the Shah is the island of stability in the Middle East. In the Bronx, we used to say bullshit has its own sound. I'm seeing millions of people taking to the streets. The average person, like the little dopes you speak to in Parliament, these little boys and gutless girls, they had no idea of The United States, and as you were talking about, the UK overthrow of the democratically elected government of Mossadegh in 1953, because that lousy Iranian president had the nerve to say, no, this oil doesn't belong to Anglo-Iranian oil or Standard Oil. Oh, better known today as BP and, it's ExxonMobil back then, Standard Oil today. It belongs to the Iranian people. No, it doesn't. And all the data came out. It only took until 2017 for the crap that spewed out of that little Churchill's mouth. The MI6, him, and the CIA that was also headed by Kermit Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, to overthrow Mossadegh. So when the people are taking to the streets, I said, no, this thing is for real. And that's how I became a trend forecaster. I became a political atheist, and I stopped believing the BS in the mainstream media, and I started investing in gold and oil. That's when I became a trend forecaster. I said, what will the implications be? And gold and oil, a $10,000 bet, I made almost $750,000. And I quit my job and I became a trend forecaster. I lost a lot of the dough. I was, gambling away. But now what's going on is the same thing. All they're doing is teaching us how to hate Iran. You're seeing all the sanctions, the crap, the puke coming out of the mouth of the politicians. We're condemning Iran for attacking Israel. Hey, wait a minute. Israel could attack Iran anytime they want. They could attack a consulate that's against international law, even in a time of war. They could kill any commander. They could kill anybody they want anywhere. That's right. We're the chosen people. Oh, it says so right in the Torah, chapter 6, section 8. You're making up this crap. Now they're putting sanctions on Iran. This thing is heating up. Israel is going to strike back. When they do, World War III is going to continue to escalate. If we don't have peace on earth, we are going to be annihilated in nuclear war. Oh, don't believe me? Look up the Samson option. Oh, yeah, in Israel, Samson option, if we lose, we go nuclear. And we only have about between 200 to 400 nuclear warheads. Oh, you have nuclear warheads? That's right. But Iran's not allowed to have them. We're the chosen people. This is serious.
It's deadly serious, Gerald. And sometimes I think there's only thee and me can see it. I've been following your coverage online, and I'm a big supporter of your journal. And I'm just wondering how it is that the United States, I'll come to the UK in a minute, but how did the United States walk quietly into a situation where virtually every politician is literally bought and paid for by the supporters of Israel? And I'm talking people who wouldn't be a legend in their own street. I'm talking people whose faces I've never seen, whose names I've never heard. They're the congresswoman or man from this or that, and they're receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from a foreign country, which doesn't even have to register as a foreign agent, such that your country is no longer in control of its own destiny. How does Joe Biden tell Netanyahu to go and get lost when Israel gave him $11.1 million? How?
He doesn't. Again, the whole thing is bought off, and you're making it perfectly clear that nobody knows about AIPAC, foreign establishment, and they're doing anything that they want. They're buying off everybody. America, this is the country that kills people all over the world in the name of freedom and democracy. To run for office in America, you got to have a lot of money behind you. By the way, I began my career running political campaigns in Westchester County, the richest county in America. I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate, designed and instructed American politics and campaign technology, how to run campaigns, taught it at St. John's University. What people call a government is nothing more than a crime syndicate. And I also, by the way, I watched your podcast with your show with Scott Ritter on following Iran's attack. all of the media in America and all of the little imbeciles that follow the mainstream media believe that Israel was victorious in stopping Iran when they attacked, knowing nothing of the facts. Everybody should listen to that podcast that you did with Scott Ritter and how you introduced him and who he is. And he's a friend of mine. We go out to dinner. He's talking at my peace rallies up here. I launched Occupy Peace over a decade ago. He gives the details, but here was the headlines that the people swallow. Iran has launched dozens of drones at Israel. IDF says it aims to intercept them in hours. And then they said 99% of them were destroyed. And again, have no details about the facts of this. So everybody, please watch that video. Scott Ritter makes it clear of the true danger Israel is in. And also, Mr. Galloway, you were talking about how they created, when I heard some of it before I came on the air, about how they invented the state of Israel. This is your Trends Journal when it used to be a quarterly, 2006, Crusades 2000. Regardless of what England's reasons or intentions were, self-serving or otherwise, Crusades 2000 was set in motion by the 1917 Balfour Declaration. Oh, what's a Balfour Declaration? Well, we don't know anything, but a Balfour Declaration that laid the foundation for Israel, quote, His Majesty's government, His Majesty's government, these murderous bastards over there where the sun never sets on the British Empire, we are slaughtering people all over the world. Oh, that's right, His Majesty's government. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Who the hell is he to say that they should establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine? Oh, the Rothschilds. Look it up. It's a fact. It goes on. And we will use our best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective. Totally invented. Totally invented. Have no right being there. Oh, and they just stole about another 7,000 acres of Palestinian land in the West Bank that they call settlements in violation of the Geneva Convention and Article 242 of the United Nations. This is serious what's going on. This is a demonic government in charge,
very
slaughtering
serious.
innocent people.
Yeah, slaughtering 72% of the people who've been slaughtered were women and children. Ipso facto, by definition, not Hamas. The idea that these women and children were legitimate targets would not be accepted in any other theater of conflict. It would not be accepted as legitimate behavior by any other government anywhere in the world, including your government, including my government. But it is somehow acceptable for Israel to do it. And when they can no longer defend it, they simply begin not to report it. So 11 children were killed yesterday in a playground in the Benghazi refugee camp in Gaza. 11 children. Not one single British newspaper or British media outfit even reported that it happened. Talk about exceptionalism, Gerald.
Actually, at least, yep. And matter of fact, you know who did report it in the United States was the Cartoon News Network, CNN. And it said at least 13 people were killed, including several children, and more than 25 injured after a strike targeted the al-Maghazi refugee camp. And they show the graphics, the videos, and this is the nice language. You ready? Dozens of people appear to be running around in panic. They have the video, screaming and trying to count and carry the dead bodies. It shows several casualties scattered on the floor, including children with blood streaming across the floor. Kids screaming, people screaming, kids dead on the ground. They were just playing football. and they were martyred. This guy's, again, right in front of everybody's eyes. Like you said, could you imagine if it was the Jewish people in Gaza and the Palestinians were bombing them to death like this? Oh my God, how terrible. The hypocrisy.
It's very difficult to bear. It's very difficult to remain unemotional about it. But let me try and segue before I start crying. You are a political atheist, and your attitude is, a plague on all of their houses, and that's no wonder when we see the character of the people that are running for office. But because you are the most perspicacious man in America, help our international audience with your reading so far on how the American presidential election is going.
It's a guessing game. We had the Trends Journal magazine, and by the way, anybody could get the Trends Journal magazine by going to trendsjournal.com, and you get 10% off. You hit MOATS, they'll put up the link to put on, and it's only $2.50 a week. It's nothing. And this week's is almost 200 pages, and you can listen to it. It's a magazine. You read what you want. But going back to the presidential election, we called Trump a winner in May of 2016 when we said that we were the only ones saying it. All the polls showed he would lose. Right now, it's a total guessing game. And again, I've been at this, I said, a lot of years. I used to run political campaigns, taught at St. John's University, on and on. One of my lines is, when all else fails, they take you to war. When you go to war, people have they back the president that's in power. If you need any more proof, let's go back to the dot-com bust. Again, we had forecasted in your Trends Journal, dot-com this, fall of 1999. We said it was going to bust by the second quarter of 2000. It did in March. America's in a deep recession. They couldn't stand little Georgie Bush. What happens? 9/11. War on terror. We're going to get that guy Osama bin Laden, dead or alive. A little boy of nothing with a pair of cojones smaller than a mothball, a little ignorant little jerk of a nothing, a daddy's boy. 88% of the people swallow the crap spewing out of his mouth. When all else fails, they take you to war. Nobody could predict what's going to go on with this presidential reality show. That's all it is. And also, as people are watching, again, one of my lines is GC's 3 Gs, guns, gold, and a getaway plan. You better prepare for the worst. One of our top trends for 2024, it's right there for anybody to see, January 2nd, 2024, a golden year for gold. Gold prices are up now over $300 an ounce since we said that. The reason gold is going up, there are basic reasons. One, in the run-up to the presidential reality show, they're going to lower interest rates to keep the power in the United States. Miss Facha Brut, the ugly face, Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, her former job was the head of the Federal Reserve, shows you who's running the country. She's the Treasury Secretary. They want to keep her in there. They're going to lower interest rates. The lower interest rates go, the deeper the dollar falls, and it's going to be the beginning of the death of the dollar, the higher gold prices go. Number two, oil prices, which are going to bring inflation in very heavily if and when, not if, when the Israel war and Iran war escalate. You're going to see oil prices hit around $130 a barrel. That's going to crash the global economy and the equity markets. Number three is they're going to do everything they can to come out with a digital currency. And when they do that, gold prices are going to go up too. That's another one that's pushing them up. So you got the inflation, you got gold, and you got the war. The war is going to keep heating up, and that's going to really bring up gold prices. Gold prices, as we're speaking now, are about 2,300 and is $75 an ounce. It was up as almost $3,240 an ounce today. It backed off. We can see gold hitting around $3,000 an ounce this year. This is serious. The reason, again, other reason they're buying it, you go to China. The China economy, when they locked the place down for 3 years, it destroyed the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people. The place was overbuilt after they brought him into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Bill Clinton did. And they skyrocketed their GDP. It got overbuilt. They made a bad situation worse with 3 years of COVID lockdown. So what's going on? The real estate sector in China accounts for nearly 30% of the gross domestic product. And the real estate sector is crashing. What also is going to bring gold prices up that no one's talking about, that's one of our top trends of 2024, is banks go bust. When they lock down everything and force people to stay at home, and you're in the UK and listening great over there, and that was a Canary Wharf, or what do they call it, where all the HSBC one after another are leaving. The office vacancy rate in New York City is 23%. San Francisco, 30%. Portland, Oregon, 29%. On average, over 20%. Office vacancy rate, nobody there, around 50%. There's going to be huge defaults on these trillions. It's almost $2 trillion worth of commercial real estate. You're going to see massive defaults. They're not talking about this at all. That's going to crash the banking system. That's why gold prices are going to go up also. But again, when all else fails, they take you to war.
Well, as Gerald says, when all else fails, they take you to war. Gerald Celente is very rarely wrong. But with Donald Trump now coming into the White House, we'll bring him back on the show early in 2025 to hear his annual predictions. Coming up next, Professor Marandi was on MOATS 11 times this year, and it still wasn't enough. He is a pillar of authority on the Middle East crisis. We hear from him next, right after this short break. Stay tuned.
Hello, George. I heard Neil Kinnock commenting on you losing your seat, okay? I was disgusted and amazed at what he said. He was like an ignorant football supporter. He actually punched his fist in the air, saying he was delighted that you were gone, that you were a horrible person. That's the first thing he said. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was conniving morning, noon and night to kick you out of the party. Now, this is before Tony Blair, and you were in good standing with the Labour Party. Mr. Kinnock, that chap just totally disgusted me. So what I think the British have to do, and the Irish and everybody else, is they need a new conversation and stop drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I think all those people in British civil society, including Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Ken Livingstone, and very many more, have to have a conversation about how to wean the British and everybody else away from these Coca-Cola and Pepsi parties.
Nobody knows who Neil Kinnock is. Those who know who he is know he's the man from the Welsh Valleys that betrayed the miners. Frankly, the hatred of Neil Kinnock I wear not even as a badge of honour, a little tiny pin maybe, because pretty soon no one will have heard of him at all. But the wider subject that you raise is the important one. I don't know, Jeremy says he doesn't want to form a party. That's fine by me. I've got my own party. I'll be staying in it anyway. But what I would like him to do is to announce a new popular front, like the one that has just, I can tell you officially, won the French parliamentary elections.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, we spoke to Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi of the University of Tehran, Department of American Studies, 11 times this year on the crisis. That's how deep and long a crisis it has been. In February, I started by asking him what he thought about Iran's recent response to the Israeli attacks. It's definitely worth watching again.
I think that we have to look at it in the broader context. In April, when the Iranian embassy was struck and the Iranians wanted to carry out a response, I'm sure you recall that Iran used a large number of drones and a few missiles. Most of the drones were all very old, dirt cheap, as they say, and the missiles were mostly old missiles. The Americans, they did the heavy lifting, and the Israelis brought most of them down to great cost. I think the Americans spent $2.5 billion and the Israelis almost $1.5 billion. But the real objective, and some of the more advanced missiles got through and hit their targets, but the real objective of Iran, the number one objective, was to gather intelligence about the defense capabilities that the Americans and the Israelis and the French and the British and everyone else had mustered together. And this time around, the Iranians were much more serious. And you're absolutely correct. The Iranians did not strike civilian targets. The Iranians struck key military targets. From what I'm hearing from Tehran, there was enormous damage to the infrastructure of the targets that were struck. And the Iranians said immediately that if the Israelis choose to respond, which I think will probably happen and will probably happen soon, that the Iranians will strike again, and it will strike again much harder. And I think probably the Americans and the Israelis miscalculated. They didn't think that Iran would hit so hard, or that the Iranians had such advanced weapons and in such large numbers. And I think if the Israelis do continue this, they will be outgunned. The Iranian strikes will be massive, and they can go on for weeks and months because Iran has many underground missile tunnels and missile bases across the country, which can't be hit. And the reason is that Iran prepared them for potential war with the United States. After the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Iranians began to develop these capabilities. So Israel is not the United States. It's completely dependent on the United States and the West to sustain itself. So I think that any escalation, any further escalation by the Israelis actually hurts the Israeli regime more than anyone else and empowers the collective resistance and the axis of resistance. But I'm sure that the Israelis are hoping otherwise. But usually what I've noticed, at least, is that Western powers and the Israelis, since they look down upon the rest of the world, their calculations are usually made in arrogance. And that arrogance and hubris is what brings about their defeat. And I think we saw that in Gaza. We saw that alongside the border with Lebanon. They murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I was there. I was literally 1,000 meters away when they struck Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah but slaughtered hundreds of people. I was there actually today as well. I went to see the neighborhood. They're still digging people out from under the rubble in that particular attack. They thought that this was a big win, but it wasn't. I think it raised the stature of Hezbollah and made Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah a bigger hero than it was perceived before. He's much more popular across the region and the world. Hezbollah is now, everyone is looking to Hezbollah. Its popularity is going to have an impact. And the soldiers and the commandos and the officers, they're extremely highly motivated. And I'm sure you've seen the news today. The Israelis tried to enter Lebanon and they were badly mauled by Hezbollah forces, and not by the Rizwan brigade. They have not been a part of the fighting yet. So I think the Israeli regime always overestimates its capabilities, underestimates its foes, and that is one reason why it's losing.
We'll come back to the Iran front in a minute. Let's go to the Lebanese front, which you have in any case segued into there. It was a very bad day for the Israeli invasion force. I say invasion force, but they're scarcely over the border and are already sustaining very serious damage. Because, of course, for Israelis who don't want to be there, whose mind is half on the beach, these are not people who particularly keen to die for Benjamin Netanyahu. Many of them may even be political opponents of his. Their morale must have taken a hell of a beating today, on day one, in the first field, in the first forest. What do you say?
I agree completely. And I think it was both a combination of arrogance, but also the fact that many of these Israelis are not prepared to fight. They've, first of all, been fighting for almost a year now in Gaza. They're tired. They've had many casualties. The reservists, many of them are not performing well at all, according to the reports. Some are not even reporting to duty. But also, you're absolutely correct. The Israelis have been pampered by the collective West. The West has been pampering this regime all the time. Otherwise, without the West, it would not last more than a few days on the battlefield. And so these men and women, their lives have been very easy over there. They were only used to, when they were wearing uniform, they were used to humiliating Palestinians in the West Bank or guarding the apartheid wall in Gaza or the West Bank and shooting at people who approached the apartheid wall and shooting them in the head or in the knee and having target practice. This was the very difficult work that they had back then. Or they'd go into the West Bank, they'd go into houses, beat people up, take over their houses, take photos of themselves humiliating Palestinians. That was the usual job that they had, not fighting a serious military force like Hezbollah, which is highly trained and which has prepared itself for this war for the last 18 years. They've been developing thousands of kilometers of tunnels throughout the south and central part of Lebanon and probably the north as well. And the Israelis, they thought that they scored decisive wins by assassinating a few people, but you know this better than I. Beirut has always been the weakest link. It is a center for espionage. This was the case during the PLO here. And Western embassies, Western journalists, Western NGOs, especially over the last couple of decades, this has become a thing. All of these are means to gather intelligence. All these impoverished refugees, but also people like the right-wing militias. You recall Jajja's Lebanese forces who were allied to the Israelis. And during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, they, alongside the Israelis, went into the Sabra Shatila camp, which is not very far from where we are. And in less than 48 hours, they killed almost 4,000 people, Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians, and some Lebanese. So these massacres that we're seeing today, carried out by the Israeli regime and their allies, they're not new. And it doesn't have anything to do with Hezbollah. It goes back way before Hezbollah. But the point is that Lebanon is not Beirut. Beirut, the Israeli regime scored some successes, which I think in the long run are detrimental to Israeli interests, because Hezbollah has become more popular, and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has become extremely popular outside of those beyond the people who always loved him. And you could see that on the streets over when it was announced that he was martyred. But Hezbollah's capabilities across the country, its military capabilities, are untouched. The underground capabilities are completely untouched. And the Israelis have, as you pointed out, they have not yet set foot into this country, and they're already suffering major casualties. Imagine what it will be like when they try to get in to the country and advance 20 kilometers inside or 30 kilometers inside. It'll be a bloodbath.
And it's carnage as usual for the poor prisoners in the Gaza concentration camp. So angry were the Israeli regime at Iran's response, they slaughtered children in an orphanage. Now, actually, we've become inured to hospitals being destroyed, schools being destroyed. It's a new low for Netanyahu to murder children in an orphanage. Is the possibility of the wider war likely to make things even worse for the people in Gaza, or might Israel's attention have to be diverted elsewhere?
Well, I'd just like to add that after Iran's retaliation to Israeli provocations, and I just want to remind the audience, and I'm sure they know because your audience is very politically aware, the Iranian response was because of the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the martyrdom of Miss Ismail Haniyeh, who was a guest of the president of Iran and his companion, and also the murder of the Iranian general, and of course Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and a host of other reasons and provocations that the Israelis carried out against Iran. There are a host of reasons why the Iranians retaliated. But instead of, and the Iranians, as we were discussing earlier, struck military targets. As revenge, last night here in Beirut, the Israelis pounded southern Beirut till morning. And today we went to Dahieh, downtown Beirut, which you know, and you've had TV shows there. They brought down many buildings, apartment blocks, and we went today and saw some of these blocks that were struck this morning. There was smoke rising, and they were constantly telling us to move, to leave, because they were afraid of more airstrikes. But when I was walking through, in one area, there were 5 apartment blocks, we were told, because there was just rubble. They said there were 5 apartment blocks here. And I was just thinking maybe people right now are still alive underneath. And just thinking about it made me feel sick. So out of revenge, they went and slaughtered orphans in Gaza and started destroying southern Beirut. Yet Western journalists, for the most part, mainstream journalists, legacy media journalists, are only talking, they erased this from history. Even when they murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he was martyred, they focus on saying Hezbollah stronghold, Hezbollah site, whereas they slaughtered hundreds of people in order to kill him. And they said that, well, they're embedded in the population and they're hiding among the population. And then last night we saw CNN in Tel Aviv say the Mossad building is in a densely populated area and people are at risk. Why doesn't CNN, why doesn't Western media call that an example of the Israeli regime hiding among its own civilian population? In fact, Hezbollah created those tunnels under Beirut so that the Israelis would not bother to strike civilians because it was so deep. But they used 83 one-ton missiles, the Israeli regime. It was amazing. As I said, I was close by in order to kill him. And today, when we went there, they were, as I said, they're still digging people out. So this is a barbaric regime. But when I've been speaking to most journalists, most white mainstream Western journalists, even some of them in Beirut, it doesn't seem to matter to them. It's about Israel it's all about Israel defending itself. Everything is about Israel defending itself. It's stunning.
Professor Marandi is a regular guest on our show because you won't find him elsewhere. You won't find his quality of analysis with a different point of view elsewhere, at least not 11 times, and at the length that we give him to explain his point of view. I'm sure that we'll be calling on him again in 2025. Richard Medhurst, a young man with a burgeoning reputation, told us the story in October when he was arrested under the Terrorism Act at Heathrow Airport. Don't miss it. This is MOATS Christmas. Be right back. China is the one that is doing what ought to have been done from the start. You and I both know there are some things that are too important to the people, the nation, the country, to be left to the private sector, and there are some things too specialized that are too important to people's ordinary lives to be given over to the state. As I always put it, have you ever seen anyone happy with a haircut from a state barber, or a suit tailored by a state tailor, or a great meal being served in a state canteen? There are all kinds of things that are better left to the private sector, but there are all kinds of things that are too important to be left to the private sector. And that synthesis of public and private, that mixed economy, that common sense socialism is what we in the Workers' Party of Britain fight for our own country. Every country has the right, of course, to its own path, and Russia has the right to its. I'm only interested in Russia nowadays in as much as Russia is playing the leading role in stopping the spread of American hegemony, stopping the unipolar tyranny of United States rule. Of course, because I love Russia, I particularly want Russia to do well. I want Russians to do well. But what kind of government they have is a matter only for them.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
We spoke to Richard Medhurst 8 times over the course of the last year on the mother of all talk shows. Back in October, as I said, he was bundled off a plane in Britain and arrested in handcuffs at Heathrow Airport. I asked him what happened. You'll want to hear what it was.
What happened to me was a scandal, honestly. I mean, I was going to London. I was met at the entrance of the aircraft. They told me to come to the front of the plane, and suddenly there's these 6 police officers, one of them even in tactical gear, and they were telling me that I had to give them my bags and come off the plane, and they wouldn't really explain why. And then they said that I'm being arrested, so not detained, but arrested under the Terrorism Act of Section 12. I mean, to this minute, I really can't believe it. And they wouldn't really explain what exactly Section 12 meant. They basically put me in handcuffs, and they weren't just normal handcuffs. They were double locked and wrists on top of each other. So you're like this. I almost, to struggle to not fall over in the van. They drove me about 10 minutes to Heathrow police station. And they threw me in a cell, basically. They ransacked my bags and all this stuff, and then they threw me into a cell that was, I mean, it's more of a toilet than a cell, honestly. There was no toilet paper, no windows, barely any light, freezing cold. And you have to beg, you have to nag for the most basic of things. You know, since the moment they arrested me, I was saying, I just got off the plane, I'd like some water, please. I ended up waiting hours for one small cup of water. You know, I also was told I'm not allowed to speak to my family. So, you know, they were saying you have the right to tell someone that you're locked up. Well, I said I'd like to do that very much. And then they would answer, well, your calls have been withheld. And they even gave me a pamphlet that said I had the right to say it. And I was, you know, I thought I better drop it. I better not even argue, because it felt like being in a primary school. You know, you're being told to shut up even. So, you know, it was basically not being told what I've done for about 15 hours, thrown in a toilet and told to shut up. And it's a miracle that they called a solicitor, because I was honestly not expecting not expecting them to do it at all. And then they questioned me for about an hour. Maybe it was an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's no need to keep me, almost 24 hours. I think they did it to intimidate me and to dehumanize me. And you know, when I got to the station, they made me basically take off my shoes. I had to take off my socks. I had to pull the socks inside out and hold them up to a group of police officers for them to look at, and then hold up my feet. You know, like it's unbelievable, really.
It is unbelievable, even as I hear you describe it for the second time. The pen is mightier than the sword, but it is, after all, a pen. And a pen cannot, however you dice it, be described as a terrorist weapon. How did they even begin to make the argument that you were worthy of arrest and handcuffing under terrorism legislation?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not really at liberty to go into the questions, because I'm still under investigation. They might charge me in 3 months or whenever, and I have to go back to this police station. So I'm out on bail. I'm on pre-charge bail. Now, they told me it's unconditional, but I'll get back to that in a second. How did they begin to do this? Well, you know, it's about my coverage regarding Palestine. Fundamentally, that's what it is, and I feel like they're targeting me because I don't know which story it is in particular, but I was doing a lot of stuff recently. I was talking about the Israeli Olympic athletes, you know, how they were saying pro-genocide and pro-war things and not being neutral. I was talking about the gang rape in State Amman, the massacres. So I don't know what it is that ticked them off. Maybe it was something from a few months ago as well. I really don't know, but I think they just, you know, they just want to silence me. They want to have this case hanging over my head. You know, living in fear. Am I going to be charged? What can I say? Can I talk about what happened to myself? Can I talk about what's happening in Palestine? So they want to muzzle me, George. That's effectively what they're trying to do. And so they say it's unconditional, but it's not unconditional.
Your parents must be horrified. Your family has given distinguished service to Britain. And indeed to the international community through the United Nations, Nobel Peace Prize winners. It is literally unbelievable, actually, that someone like you could end up in the circumstances that you ended up this weekend. But I would like to advise you that the decision to do this to you could not have been made by a simple police officer. No police officer has the idea that a man who just bought his ticket that morning should be met by 6 officers. You try getting 6 officers to any crime scene, one in tactical gear. This was not a police decision. This is a political decision, driven no doubt by the intelligence services, but a politically accountable decision to seize, like some banana republic, a distinguished British citizen, increasingly renowned for his broadcasting and journalism in the world. So I believe that the crime that was committed against you was committed not by the cops that were sent there, but by the political masters who took a decision that Richard Medhurst has to be cut down to size. Are you able to comment at all on that?
I don't know, honestly, but honestly, George, I'd be surprised if it were anything else. It certainly feels like a political persecution, and you know, the thing is that I'm not going to say if it was because of foreign interests or not, because I genuinely do not know. But to be honest, the idea that you know, that I would support or have anything to do with terrorism is preposterous. I mean, if you're going to arrest someone and send 6 police officers, you obviously have some idea who you're arresting and what their profile is. So they know I'm a journalist, and they know who my father is. He was in the Metropolitan Police. He's an authority on counterterrorism, right? Counterterrorism. So he taught me a lot about that as well. I mean, I myself, I'm a victim of terrorism. When we were posted in Islamabad, when I was in the British school, you know, there was a double suicide bombing in the building next door, the Egyptian embassy, and while I was inside the school, I remember that. And you know, I condemn terrorism. I want nothing to do with terrorism. I think the idea that I would have some kind of, you know, ill intention towards the country or something like that is preposterous. Really, I mean, the 6 officers coming to arrest me, and again, I'm not talking about them personally, but this kind of intimidation, that is a form of terrorism. They're literally trying to terrorize you into you know, into shutting up. They're trying to make you submit and stay quiet, and I can't allow that to happen. I have a moral duty. I have to continue my work. But the problem is now that the threshold for the Section 12 of the Terrorism Act is so low, it is so draconian, that anything, truly anything at all, can be skewed into the most preposterous crime. You know, they can take anything that you have said, or that even something you didn't say, and accuse you of terrorism. I mean, I really, if I could only speak freely, I think you would be 10 times as shocked as to what happened, George, really. But there's no doubt it's a political persecution. I feel like my coverage on Assange also might have annoyed some people. And the fact that I've been coming to England, and, you know, this is my country, and I've been invited all up and down the country, and, you know, east and west to speak, and they don't like that. So, you know, the idea that we're going to submit and yield to Zionism and these kinds of interests, I mean, they're trying it on the wrong person.
Amen. I'll not tempt you further, Richard, because I can sense that there are limits to what you can tell us. But please accept the full solidarity of everyone at the mother of all talk shows, and I'm sure everyone watching this show this evening. What's the best way that people can show their support for you right now?
Just to make noise, just to highlight how absurd the Terrorism Act is and unjust it is. I mean, I was literally criticizing it as I was getting on the plane, and then I got arrested under it. It's really remarkable. So the best way they can support is just to make noise and try and raise awareness, and you know, put pressure on the organizations that are for free speech and journalism to also issue statements in you know, against the Terrorism Act, because it's not just about me. This is the beginning of an escalation. They're making an example out of me, and they'll go after others, because they've usually detained people. They've never, I don't know of any cases where they actually arrested journalists under Section 12. So I think I'm the first one, and you know, it's not going to stop here. So I'm grateful to everyone for their moral support, and it really goes a long way. It's really cherished. Thank you, George.
Richard Medhurst there, and his incredible story and his dedication to telling the truth is undimmed. Looking forward to hearing from him too in the course of 2025. But coming up next, an old friend of mine from New York City, attorney Lamis Deek, on the ICJ ruling on Israel. Stay with us. Well, first of all, Bob Geldof and his good friend Bono are on the other side. It wasn't for South Africa, it was for the Horn of Africa. I was involved in it at the time. That was my job at the time. and there were many differences. First of all, it was easy because of Cold War politics to take a stand on the famine in sub-Saharan Africa in 1984-85. I did so myself, but it was easy to do. There was no Ethiopian lobby smearing you as an anti-Ethiopian racist if you got involved in it. There was absolutely gale force wind of free publicity from the newspapers and the television about the famine in Africa at that time. There is zero publicity in the mainstream media about the calvary being undergone by the Palestinian people in 2024. Thirdly, the artists involved lost nothing and arguably gained much by being involved in that charitable enterprise. Artists today lining up for Palestine, like the great Eric Clapton, like the great Roger Waters, and I'm running out of names already, would not only not be benefiting from putting on a Live Aid for Palestine, their careers would be destroyed, would be brought to a shuddering halt if they did. So I'm afraid none of the conditions which made possible the Live Aid phenomenon exist over Palestine. Indeed, quite the contrary.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Lamis Deek is a famous Palestinian-American attorney, but she's no ordinary attorney. She's one of the best and one of the most active Palestinian supporters of justice in the United States of America. The highest court ruled that the Palestinian resistance was legitimate, that Israel's claim of self-defense was not. So I started by asking her about her reaction to the ICJ ruling. Watch this.
I think that this is a pivotal moment in Palestinian history. That's how I would mark it. Not because the ICJ said anything that we didn't know. I mean, as you said, yes, ICJ, lipstick on the pig on one hand, but I think what it did is it wiped the lipstick off the pigs and has been forcing them to confront themselves, has been forcing international law, the UN international system, and states to confront themselves and either admit that they have relegated and lay waste to law for justice and peace, or accept and begin a new era. And I think the onus is on them. It is just a declaratory judgment. I know a lot of people, and I'd like to address this if that's okay. And by the way, thank you for that moving and kind introduction, George. Many things are not pleasurable these days as a Palestinian. Seeing you, one of our heroes, the progress that you've made for all social justice causes is truly a pleasure and delight to be with you, and I thank you. This is a declaratory judgment, right? They articulated everything that Palestinians and their allies and you have been saying for the past 58 years and 76 years. So it's declaratory. It's an affirmation and a reaffirmation of law. But this is, in fact, it is, a conviction in the highest court of the world, in the only and highest legal organ of the United Nations, which means that this bears a lot of weight. And there are numerous critical features of this opinion that I think haven't been discussed. You well know, George, that one of Israel's strongest games and strategies has been to create facts on the ground and then force the international system to reply and revolve around these facts on the ground. And what the ICJ has said all of that is meaningless. It doesn't matter how big your settlements are, how many settlers you have, how big your prisons and dungeons and military bases are, they all have to leave. It has laid waste to the Israeli strategy of facts on the ground making law, which also means that all of the instruments and legal names for all of the criminal acts that they have taken, unprecedented in nature and duration, are not legitimate. This is huge. This speaks to the prison system. This speaks to the convictions. This speaks to the support that these illegalities have been given by the Western world, i.e. consider the terrorism designation, because the ICJ has also said that Palestinian resistance to these illegalities, i.e. war crimes and crimes against humanity, is itself legitimate, number one, and that self-defense by Israel is not legitimate, and that their claim of self-defense, the entire justification of self-defense for all of their apparatuses, physical, legal, military, settlement, and otherwise, are lies. And this is the other really critical feature of the ICJ decision. If people read it clearly, it's a short decision. They've said all of these things are lies. And you raised UN Resolution 242, and I think it's important to have a bit of a broad and detailed approach to the reading of this decision. But given that 242 repeatedly reinforces the Israeli narrative of the need for security and land swaps, this also brings into question the legitimacy and the nature of Resolution 242, even if it's been referred to. So I think those are two of some of the most critical features. I've got more to say, but I do want to let you interrupt me and guide it to basically discuss what do we do now and why is this pivotal? This is pivotal because there's been trillions of dollars spent on this, right? This has also laid waste to the myth of Israeli democracy, of Western morality in their support of the Israeli apartheid for genocide and colonize for genocide project. This has laid waste to Western credibility, and I don't mean just the governments, but society and media at large, who have regurgitated and enforced and imposed Israeli mythology for the purpose of colonization and genocide. And this is very important for the rest of the world to see and understand that these are all lies. All of the systems that have been built around this, the trillions of dollars, the normalization projects, including many of our current and former administrations here in the US, have all been laid to waste by this ICJ decision, alongside the negotiation posture between, mind you, the Palestinian Authority and not the PLO, which is the only legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority has not been elected by the Palestinian people, right? The negotiation terms have now completely repivoted and should be returning, and I'm not saying that Oslo is legitimate, to the core issues of Palestinian return, reparations, self-determination. So you can cut me off or I can keep going and talk about another critical feature, which is the court's finding and reaffirmation of self-determination being inalienable to Palestinians. It didn't say inalienable only to Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It said inalienable to Palestinians. This opens the door for many things and work to come. And I think you nailed it in, everything that you've said before. Nothing is self-executing. This opinion is not self-executing. The laws, justice, morality is not self-executing. And that's on us. I'll concede to you, and I can talk more about both the critical features, the potential for how we can use this, what this means for the rest of Palestine and Palestinians, the majority of whom do not live in the West Bank and Gaza, and perhaps what we could do moving forward. George.
Well, I think you have peerlessly demolished the dissenting voices, if there are any. They seem to be treating the ICJ as if it never happened, rather than contest its legally incontestable findings. But you have demolished any possible lines of defense of the Israeli position, which, if I may summarize, all the territory, including East Jerusalem, is illegally occupied territory. Illegally occupied territory cannot be held on to for 55 plus years 75 plus years, then it becomes an attempt at permanent occupation. If you have permanent occupation, it's first of all illegal, but must involve a secondary crime, namely of an apartheid system to stop the people of that illegally occupied territory having a say in how they are governed and what their purpose is. The third thing you touched on, which is very important to me, because I did not get involved in this subject 50 years ago for the people of the West Bank and Gaza. I'd never been in the West Bank or Gaza then. I got involved in this because of the millions of Palestinians living in refugee camps in other countries altogether and their right to return to their homes. They are now included in this subject in the way that they were excluded by Oslo, which failed to address their right to return. But now the court has vindicated their inalienable, i.e. cannot be changed by anybody, by any negotiation, by any treaty. A negotiation cannot overrule someone's inalienable rights. So the Palestinian right to return is another great victor of this court decision. So it's plain that they intend to ignore the court's decision. Although I noted that Mr. Lavrov said this week that Russia can no longer be an observer to these events that are taking place, not just in Palestine, but vis-a-vis the neighboring countries also. I saw Mr. Lavrov's not a man that speaks idly or loosely. He meant something by that. And I'm thinking that some Russian, Chinese, India, whatever BRICS move is coming. But if they ignore the verdict of the ICJ, that leaves us feeling good because we're vindicated, but it doesn't bring much relief to your people, the Palestinian people, does it?
Not immediately. And I think you touched on this a few times today, but in many prior instances and shows, George, which is this is cumulative. And this is a matter of leveraging and bargaining power. I do want to highlight a couple of more critical features so that we can understand, and I'd like you and others to understand how this can all be leveraged. I alluded to the deconstruction of Israeli lies and the failure of justifications for those lies. This implicates how Palestinians are treated throughout the world, even within Palestine in the 1948 territories and in the refugee camps. But moving on, aside from finding that Palestinians have the right to go back to their homes, what the ICJ also clearly stated was that Palestinians have the right to reparations, and then clarified that reparations included reparations, restitution, and satisfaction, taken in the context that the Palestinian people are defined as a whole and their rights are now treated as a whole from the highest UN organ and international court. This becomes very critical into how does this get leveraged for bargaining power. I think that is critical. The other element is the finding that Gaza and the West Bank are one, and this cannot be reconciled without looking at and reaffirming both these two last features, Resolution 194, and perhaps even reconsidering Resolution 181. Now, the ICJ also kicked it back over to the UN General Assembly, and they said, go and find and figure out the modalities. Well, that means that governments with proper learned counsel, right, diplomatic advocates, legal advocates would be willing and have a broad swath of mechanisms, legal mechanisms, to begin implementing these rights, even if it's incremental, right? While at the same time, those who are naturally prone or will be more inclined, given the turn of global events, to take a more firm stand are also now more well equipped legally with the voice of justice, with this ruling, and with a clear, deconstructed, briefed, legally and diplomatically briefed agenda of how to implement Palestinian rights and ensure Palestinian liberation. I think this also speaks to the main topic at our hand, which it should be, which is the role of Yemen. Yemen has, since inception, been the only country that has been implementing Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Well, now they can say that they're also implementing the ICJ opinion today, which is a full boycott, divestment, and sanctions, not just for weapons and jet fuel and settlement construction equipment, prison and dungeon equipment, human resources, the terrorists who are flying in from all over the world to come and colonize. They just burned my town for the umpteenth time yesterday again, George, yeah? Coming from all over the world to do this. The Pakistani government saying that Netanyahu is now designated a terrorist. The Yemeni government designating Israeli officials and U.S. officials as terrorists, as they began to implement the legal, and we've briefed this issue out, the legal blockade of material support to genocide in Palestine by the Israelis. All of this becomes cumulative. And what this does, and I think it's important people take this away, law and discourse and society have a symbiotic relationship. One develops and creates and recreates each other. And so discourse will help further the law, and now the law will further the discourse and the grassroots movement. There's a markedly different bargaining and leverage power from the highest level of state government to the lowest grassroots level. It's a different dynamic when you walk in with your counsel, right? And you have a briefed issue when you're fired, when you're moving to divest, when you've got a ceasefire resolution, than it is to just say these things. And now we are armed in a way that is different. We understand absent direct military intervention, there isn't hope. But I do want to just briefly on that, I'm sorry, George, I know I'm going on. It's kicked over to the UN General Assembly. That doesn't stop the UN General Assembly from moving to take actions even over the objection of the UN Security Council at this point. So there's also hope for more meaningful international and state intervention, I think, at this point as well.
But we'll be following the case over the coming year. Coming up, though, is Steve Sosebee, another great American, the founder of Heal for Palestine, who'd bring a tear to a glass eye. Certainly brings a tear to my eyes. Stay tuned. There are some key metrics that very few people have yet fully grasped. This show attracts an audience exponentially higher. I mean, like multiples, more multiples than I could calculate. The written press, behind paywalls, which nobody buys. If you've ever recently been in a supermarket and seen the unsold copies, you already know nobody buys newspapers, and nobody much is prepared to pay a paywall to read stuff that they know intrinsically, instinctively. They know that they're being lied to, that it's propaganda, that the owner is not even in the business of actually selling. He's in the declining business of influencing opinion in the country for his, maybe not often her, political point of view. So first of all, why would I want to be appearing on television channels whose audience is minuscule except when I'm on it? You think I'm boasting? Take a look at the metrics. Take a look. When I'm on, when I'm not on, you'll see the difference in the audiences. So why should I help them get audiences? We need to be our own media. And increasingly, we are.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
At least 16,000 Palestinian children have been murdered in the Gaza Strip over the last 450 days. 32,000 children have had limbs amputated. Gaza is the amputation capital of the world. I started by asking Steve Sosebee, who does what he can, which is a little, in the sea of troubles of the Palestinian people, but is a lot more than anybody else is doing. I asked him how all this was affecting the people of Gaza in so many ways, seen and unseen. This is what he said.
No, it's unprecedented in modern history to witness a genocide. Every day you wake up and see new massacres, new deaths, destruction, suffering, hardship, and it continues on for months and months. The world sees it. The entire global community is aware of what's happening. It's not something that's happening in the dark or in the shadows. It's quite obvious and clear to everyone, and yet it continues. And I'm glad you mentioned the mental health component here, because when we talk about having to rebuild Gaza, and we're committed to it, we're determined to do it. Gaza will be rebuilt, but we have to rebuild the hearts and minds of the people there as well. Not only what they've experienced since October, and before that, as you said, this is just a chapter. It's been going on for years and decades and generations. The whole entire population, the 2.3 million people of Gaza, every single one of them is traumatized. Every single one of them has experienced something that none of us can possibly imagine as human beings, witnessing so much death and destruction and suffering and hunger and brutality and hopelessness every single day. We've never seen that in modern history. Those people and no, I think, captive population have ever gone through this, at least not in modern history. And it's our responsibility to rebuild and repair not only Gaza as a physical structure, but the people there who deserve the love and compassion and support and solidarity of the international community, that we stand with them, that the murder and killing of the 16,000 children and the 32,000 amputees and the millions of now mentally suffering people there, it's our responsibility. They've been treated as if their lives don't matter. The entire international community, all of us have blood on our hands, whether you're American, British, from any place on this planet. Nearly every country has some culpability in this genocide. And it's up to us as individuals and as citizens of free societies and as decent, peace-loving, justice-loving people to stand up and say enough and to serve the Palestinian people, particularly the children there, for as long as it takes to heal their wounds and repair what's been done.
Perfectly put, Steve. Before I go on to what it is that you're doing and how people can help you, how do you account for the fact? Because there are not many options as answers to this question. How do you account for the fact that in the modern age, where everyone could see it happening in real time, without even having to switch the television on, you can watch it on your telephone, and many millions of people do. How do you account for the fact that they got away with it? That Israel got away with it, that the Western governments that made it possible for Israel to get away with it? How is it possible for all these children to be slaughtered, all these children to be mutilated and maimed, yet nobody lifted a hand to stop it? How do you account for that?
Well, I'm George, you're far more educated and smarter than me on how politics works, but I can just give you my assessment and my kind of view, which is they've gotten away with it for now, but we've seen a groundswell of support all over the world. You've seen it even in the United States, where they've done their best to kind of dehumanize Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians for generations and generations, making it possible to kill their children graphically and openly, as they have been doing. And yet now you see a groundswell of support that we've never seen before. I've been doing this for more than 30 years, serving the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause in a positive way. I've never seen the amount of support, particularly in the young people. And I think it's a generational issue. As soon as this older generation is out of power, the younger generation coming in to replace them are far more plugged into the realities and the truth of what's happening globally and in Palestine, and will be making significant policy changes when it comes to the Middle East. Now, that doesn't have much bearing on what's happening today or changing the lives of the children and the people of Gaza today, but I am optimistic that in the long run, justice will prevail. Now, to get to that point, we have to help our brothers and sisters in Gaza to survive. This is an existential crisis for them, and that's where the real challenge and the struggle exists today. It is questionable. I think there's a disconnect between governments and between the people, and that even in democracies that happens. You have in the United States, where I'm from, you have a strong disconnect between the actual people in power and those who actually, and then common citizens or people in the streets. And that disconnect is probably going to cost President Biden the election. I think that the young people in this country, in the United States, are not going to come out with any kind of enthusiasm and passion to the polls in November to support him. And that's mainly because of his position on this crisis in Gaza, on this genocide, that he has continued to provide the 2,000-pound bombs, which are killing dozens and dozens of people every time they drop one. And I think that's a positive thing, not positive in the sense that, the alternative is even a worse candidate, but that there is accountability for decisions that are being made that support unlawful, unethical, and immoral decisions and policies that cost, as you said, 16,000 children their lives. And I'm happy for that, because that will start, hopefully, to impact people in the future, politicians, to make the right decision and do what's right for the long term and even in the short term, and not just think about their cynical political positions or power, how they can stay in power in the short term.
Now, tell us in a nutshell, if you would, Steve, what HEAL is doing and how our audience can help you.
Thank you, George. So HEAL Palestine was set up in January of this year. I started PCRF, my previous organization, back in the first Intifada, and that was really dedicated to helping deal with what the conditions were like during those last 30 years, and they were bad enough. And we've seen plenty of bombings in Gaza. We've seen much destruction, much suffering, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank for our Palestinian brothers and sisters in the refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan. And we were working very hard to address their needs. But in January, I decided to start another organization which would have even a more holistic and effective impact on the lives, particularly during this genocide. And what HEAL stands for, it's mainly health, education, aid, and leadership. And those first three areas are pretty straightforward. In health, we have 12 injured kids right now being treated outside, many more coming for free care they can't get inside. That's just a drop in the bucket. But what it does is it empowers our communities abroad as well to take care of them, to be involved. One of the main challenges we face as a community, in my opinion, is not only staying focused in ways that we can be involved, because as you probably know, George, you're one of the main activists on this issue. One of the main challenges we face is that people become very discouraged. They become very hopeless. And that's the biggest, I think, risk that we face, is that people either get burned out or they feel they don't have a role in having a positive impact on this issue. By bringing injured kids to the U.S., not only do we or anywhere, we'd love to send them to the U.K., we get it for free care. So we get their treatment for free care. So I think that shows also there's a high level of solidarity, even within the power structures of the medical institutions in the U.S. They're willing to treat these kids because they understand what's going on. It gives our communities a chance to be involved and to be active and to stay connected to the struggle in a way that is hopefully empowering them and motivating them to continue. So bringing kids here, we also are just opened 2 days ago a brand new field hospital in Gaza in Mawasi, Han Yunis, which is one of the last so-called safe areas in Gaza. There are no safe areas, as you know. And we're now providing hundreds and eventually thousands of people care every single day in that field hospital. We're feeding nearly 5,000 people a day. We had to move our kitchen from Rafah to Deir al-Balah, but we're opening more kitchens and hopefully feeding thousands of more people a day. We run a mental health program for traumatized children in Gaza. We have a mental health team there that are addressing their needs either through group therapy or individual one-on-one therapy, not only for the children, but for the mothers. We're doing a campaign now for the many, many mothers who are giving birth and their husbands are dead, and how depressed they are and how they don't want to even have their children just because they feel so hopeless. We're doing a program for them, a special program. In addition, we're running and building makeshift classrooms for children. As you know, since October, not a single child, whether from preschool up to graduate school, has attended a single course or class in Gaza. And the long-term impact that that's going to have on the society of Gaza is not to be understated, because it's going to be extreme to get these kids back in the classrooms. I was just talking to a host family of an 11-year-old girl we have in the U.S. now who had her leg blown off. She's above knee amputee, 11-year-old girl, beautiful child. Her father was killed in the bombing of her home. And the host mom was telling me this 11-year-old girl is supposed to be going into 6th grade. She can't add double digits. That's the impact that the occupation and the siege and the closure of schools has had on children. That's just one example. I mean, it's even more extreme in many other cases. So we're running makeshift classrooms. But our last area of work, the L in HEAL, stands for leadership and mentorship. And this is in the post-genocidal phase. And by the way, George, I never, in my 30 plus years of serving the Palestinian cause in a positive way, I never thought I would ever utter the words post-genocidal phase. But here we are in a current genocide in Gaza. When this genocide is over, and it will be over one day, God willing, we have to rebuild. And one of the areas that we're going to really focus on is taking responsibility for these thousands, tens of thousands of orphans, tens of thousands of permanently disabled children, and helping to rebuild their lives, not in the short term, but in the long term, taking responsibility for them and build and connecting them to people all over the world who can help guide and mentor them and open doors for them, give them a sense of self-esteem and also opportunities in their life to become independent, not to become waiting for their government or for any NGO or any organization, charity, to feed them and clothe them and house them. We know that Gaza people have are very intelligent, they're hardworking, that they have just they need the opportunity to rebuild their lives and rebuild their country, and we're going to help give them that. This is going to be a very unique leadership program, and we have great optimism that once this genocide is over and we can start rebuilding, that it's going to have a tremendous impact, not only on the lives of the tens of thousands of kids in Gaza, but also on our communities all over the world who are looking and searching and desperate for ways that they can contribute and be a part of serving the rebuilding of Gaza, especially the hearts and minds of these children.
I'm sure I speak for everyone, Steve. That is enormously impressive, both your record of work and your ambitions now for this incredible that we're both saying this phrase, the post-genocidal period that we have been through. Who'd have thunk it? Men of our age, talking about a post-genocidal period. What's your website? How do people support you?
Thank you, George. It's healpalestine.org. That's our website. They can reach out to us. They can contact us through volunteer at healpalestine.org. If they're looking to get involved and be involved in our work, we have medical teams going over to our field hospital. We're bringing more injured kids out for treatment they can't get otherwise. There's a great amount of opportunities for people to get involved. So if you're looking for a way to serve the children of Gaza, please reach out to us and we'll get you involved. And one more thing I just want to say, George, first of all, I appreciate your work. You're a hero of mine and of many people for your stance and your strength and your courage, speaking the truth in such an articulate manner. But in addition to that, I'm just an activist. I found a way to do something to serve Palestine 30 plus years ago, and I'm very proud to be able to do it. And you mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm a hero. I'm not a hero. The people that are heroes are the doctors and nurses in Gaza, the ambulance drivers, the people who are serving on the ground every single day, their people and their cause for justice and for freedom. I'm just a soldier in a positive way for this cause. I'm honored to do it, but I'm an American and I have blood on my hands. And it's the least that I can do, or any American can do, is stand up and serve the Palestinian people. And whatever we do, if we save 1,000 lives or 1,000,000 lives, it's not enough to what our responsibility holds as Americans to this cause and to these people. So please don't call me a hero.
Well,
call me
I'll tell you what, Steve. If you're a soldier, you're definitely an officer and a gentleman. Thanks for being with us on the show tonight. Everyone should get behind Heal Palestine. A great American indeed. And if you want to help Steve, his website is healpalestine.org. Check it out and support Steve as much as you can. Well, I hope you think it was worth doing a Christmas Day special edition of the Mother of All Talk Shows. We thought that some of you, by this time of night, would probably want a break from the festivities. Not least because it's been hard to find reasons to be cheerful over these last 12 months. We all have to do it. We can't go around with long faces and tears running down our face all the time. We have responsibilities to others. We have responsibilities to our own children, for a start. And we've all, I know, tried our best to make this Christmas a special one for them. So look after your children. We never know what's going to happen in the next 12 months, but our children are the only real treasures that we have. If, like me, you have elderly parents, in my case, my dear mother, 90 years young, look after them at all. Look after your neighbours and your friends, especially those who might, just might, be alone this Christmas. Why don't you take round some Christmas pudding and sit and have a glass of good cheer with them? As for me, well, it's been an up and down year. I've taken joy from my 3 sons' football, every single one of them, all 3 of them, captains of their respective football teams, and I'm looking forward to more medals and trophies from them over the course of the next 12 months. I have taken a great delight in the on and on and on in which the famous Glasgow Celtic are engaged, now the undisputed kings of Scottish football and the most decorated club side in the entire world. They have won more cups, more trophies, more championships, more awards, more honours than any other team in the world. And they fly Palestinian flags there too. Manchester United, don't get me started. It's been a complete heartbreak, the only saving grace being that it can't possibly be worse next year, can it? I sincerely wish a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you and your family, your friends, your circles. I hope you'll continue to join us every Sunday and Wednesday on the Mother of All Talk Shows, and maybe even bring another viewer with you. I've been George Galloway. You've been marvellous, and it's been, for us at least, a Merry Christmas. I hope it is also for you.